March 19th have been circulated. Are there any amendments or corrections required? None. They have approved as printed. The minutes from the 22nd of March have been deferred. There are no messages from the governor. Announcements by the speaker. There are none. Messages from the Senate. There are none. Papers and other communications to the House. This morning there are two such papers of communications. The first is in the name of the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance? Minister of Finance, are you with us this morning? We'll move on and come back. The Minister Furbert, are you available to do the matter for the Minister of Sport?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Could you table your matter now, present your matter now?
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of this Honorable House of Assembly the Bermuda Sport Anti-Doping Authority Annual Report 2020.
Thank you, Minister. Is the Minister of Finance available? I'm looking. Minister of Finance. We'll move on. Petitions, there are none. Statements by ministers and junior ministers. We have three statements this morning. The first is in the name of the Minister of Finance. I'm assuming he still has not been able to connect. So I'm going to ask the Minister of Public Works to do his statement, and we'll come back to the Minister of Finance. Minister of Works, would you like to present your statement at this point?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, good morning.
Good morning, Minister. Go right ahead.
I'm pleased to provide another update on the short-term stimulus program that was launched on December 17th, 2020 to a maximum value of Bermuda dollars $13.358 million, where small to medium-sized contractors were invited to participate. Mr. Speaker, the program was launched as there is an urgent need to provide stimulus to the local economy in order to retain and boost employment numbers in the wake of the economic downturn sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, the Ministry of Public Works compiled a list of shovel-rated projects immediately.
I suspect you have to be on now.
These projects are mostly infrastructure improvements and will not add further burden to government operational expenses. The project selection principles are to maximize the employment of the private sector while providing much needed refreshing of neglected infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, to ensure allocation of the stimulus funding across the participating businesses, the Ministry will maintain a register of approved contractors and awarded contracts to ensure that no one company monopolizes the project list. Once a company obtains a project, it will be rotated to the bottom of the list to allow other companies an opportunity for work. The guiding principle is to prioritize all companies that provide the most employment benefit per dollar spent while spreading the work among the median owned and operated businesses. Many of these small to medium-sized businesses have never worked for government before, and oftentimes the challenge is cash flow. In light of this, we have arranged with the Accountant General's Department to accelerate the payment schedule to every 2 weeks, noting that those who owe government money must engage in a payment plan in order to secure the work. Mr. Speaker, we have received a total of 98 submissions by the deadline of February 15th. Responses to the RFSQ continue to be evaluated. To date, 67 companies have been approved and are pre-qualified to work with the government. Several of these have been asked for quotes for various jobs. The evaluation team has been working flat out to evaluate those remaining applications. The Bermuda Economic Development Corporation assisted a total of 74 contractors with completing their submission packages for the request for statement of qualifications. Mr. Speaker, as the RFSQ phase is now over, companies have received requests for quotes for various stimulus projects and are submitting their responses. Responses to the Darrell's Wharf repair project and the Flats Bridge handrail project have been received and processed with an award due early next week. Several other sites have been put out for quotes, including the Artemis Building A fit out, the Artemis Building B fit out, highways fencing repair works, Elba Beach access stairs replacement works, and the new plant inspection building at the Botanical Gardens construction work. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Workforce Development have come up on board with their apprenticeship training program to present opportunities for Bermudians to gain valuable experience and training, which is critical in strengthening the country's economic and social development. Mr. Speaker, Workforce Development provides training and development programs and initiatives in a broad range of occupations and sectors across multiple disciplines in the workforce. It will adapt the current framework of apprenticeship training agreement contracts to be fit for purpose to encourage contractors to engage individuals to participate in various jobs and potentially provide opportunities for part-time and or full-time short and long-term employment. In summary, Mr. Speaker, Workforce Development can provide financial assistance in the form of payment and oversight as an incentive and benefit to contractors to hire a Bermudian for each of their respective companies at no cost to them. In return, the Bermudian gains entry-level skills and or upgrades their existing skill set, utilizes their transferable skills, and become gainfully employed as contributing individuals to society on the path to the economic recovery of the country. The Department's Training and Assessment Officer will provide oversight and supervision for the individual employee as the liaison between the employee and the employer. The government believes this is a win-win construct and return on investment for all parties involved as a cross-ministry initiative. We are very pleased with the response to the stimulus program from contractors and lightly employees, all of whom want to get to work and help the economy improve. This template of bundling projects together is proving to be quite efficient, and we shall look to using this concept in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Education. Minister of Education. Minister of Education. I do note that the Minister of Finance is present at the moment. Minister of Finance, would you like to do your statement? And then after we finish the three statements, we'll seek the indulgence of the House so you can table the communication that should have been done earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies for the technical problems that we had this morning. Speaker, I rise today to advise honourable members of the completion of the audit of the Consolidated Fund financial statements for the year ended 31st of March of 2020, which will be tabled in this honourable House henceforth. As honourable members are aware, the Consolidated Fund is the general operating fund of the Bermuda government and is the fund through which government conducts the majority of its transactions. Consolidated Fund financial statements report the financial position, operations, change in net debt, and cash flows resulting from the activities of the government. This includes the accounts of the Senate, the House of Assembly, all government departments and offices, and all courts. Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed to report that the Auditor General gave a qualified audit opinion on the 2019-2020 annual accounts of the Consolidated Fund of the government. Consolidated Fund previously received unqualified opinions for the years 2013 through 2017. The items that precipitated the 2018 qualified opinion were rectified, resulting in a return to clean opinion for the 2019 audit. The basis of the qualified audit opinion is as follows. Inventory departments within the Ministry of Public Works were unable to perform the physical inventory count at year-end due to the constraints of COVID-19 and associated shelter in place, and were unable to perform a determination of the slow-moving and obsolete items. The Department of Marine and Ports were unable to provide support for their physical inventory results. There was also no related provision for obsolescence for this department's inventory balance, and the auditors were not able to satisfy themselves of these inventory balances using alternate procedures. Mr. Speaker, regarding the Auditor General's inventory qualification, honorable members are advised that the approximately $6 million in inventory, in the view of the Ministry of Finance, does not cause the audited financial statements to be misleading. Mr. Speaker, under the Audit Act 1990, Section 6(1)(b), the Auditor General is able to include in her report any comments she considers appropriate. Accordingly, the Auditor General has, for the 10th consecutive year, included an other information section on matters she deems appropriate. For the 2020 report, she has also included an emphasis on matter section. The other information relates to the following. Public debt and guarantees. The Auditor General has highlighted that while the government is within the legislative limit of $2.9 billion, there is a further $952 million in guarantees to various lenders by the Consolidated Fund. Item 2, increasing net debt. The Auditor General has noted that net debt, as calculated on Statement of Change in net debt, increased by $329 million and continues to grow. This can be found on page 8 of the financial statements. And our third point is usefulness of the financial statements. The Auditor General explains that the usefulness of the financial statements is limited because they are not summary financial statements. In other words, they do not represent the combined financial position and activities of all government entities, only the Consolidated Fund. It is important to note that these explanatory paragraphs do not alter the Auditor General's opinion that the financial statements are presented fairly, except for the matters described in basis for qualified opinion, but are highlighted matters. However, Mr. Speaker, the government shares the auditor's concerns in these areas and has already begun to tackle these matters. For instance, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance has already put in place a plan to eliminate the deficit and ultimately reduce the debt. Efforts to address this in fiscal 2020-2021 were severely hampered by the challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, as noted in the Economic Recovery Plan, which was presented to this Honorable House earlier this week, government's commitment to management of fiscal and economic matters in a fiscally prudent manner remains resolute. Further, as noted in the 2021-2022 budget statement and highlighted as part of that plan, government has put in place fiscal guardrails to be adhered to, which, among other things, focus on addressing the deficit and the level of debt. Mr. Speaker, liabilities related to pensions and other employee future benefits are included in the net debt amount disclosed in the financial statements, and the government has already started a review of these benefits to ensure their sustainability. Mr. Speaker, in relation to guarantees of the Consolidated Fund to various lenders, it is important to clarify that the majority of the guarantees are related to debt taken out by public authorities. Mr. Speaker, guarantees are contingent liabilities to the government and are not included on the government's balance sheet or counted against the debt ceiling unless the guarantee becomes due and payable by the government. All guarantees are disclosed in notes to the financial statements of the Consolidated Fund and the annual budget. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the preparation of the summary financial statements for the Bermuda government, the Ministry agrees there are benefits to issuing consolidated financial statements. However, honorable members are advised that a key factor in this regard would be ensuring that there are current financial statements for all public authorities. The emphasis of matter contains a paragraph highlighting the uncertainties related to the COVID-19 pandemic. It also provides commentary on the valuation related to the Morgan's Point Caroline Bay project. In that regard, the note explains that due to the high level of uncertainty associated with recovering the cost relating to the assets of Georges Bay Limited, a valuation allowance of $183.3 million was recognized and a net carrying value of $1,000 included in the statement of financial position. The audit report is dated 9 December 2020. In 2019, it was 19th of November. Certain private debt placements made by the government contain a reporting covenant requiring delivery of the audited financial statements within 240 days of the fiscal year end, which would be the 26th of November 2020. Honorable members are advised that while this reporting covenant was not met, the government had given prior approval by the lenders to extend the delivery date to the 26th of January 2021. A detailed discussion of the highlights of the consolidated financial statements can be found in the financial statement analysis and discussion, which is included with the audited statements. Speaker, a few of the financial highlights of the 2020 consolidated fund statements are as follows. Net public debt, which excludes guarantees and is net of government borrowing sinking fund, increased by $184.9 million during fiscal 2019-2020, standing at $2.646 billion at the year end compared to $2.419 billion in 2019. This represents an increase of 8% from 2019. In September 2019, the government entered into a credit facility with Butterfield and HSBC Bermuda for $200 million. The proceeds were used to purchase the lender's rights and interest under the Morgan's Point Caroline Bay guarantee. The 2020 sinking fund balance was $41.3 million compared to $218.9 million in 2019, as $180 million of senior notes matured and were paid off during the fiscal year. Speaker, total revenue raised by the consolidated fund for fiscal 2019-2020 was approximately $1.09 billion, representing a decrease of $14.1 million or 1.3% from fiscal 2018-2019 total revenue of $1.1 billion. This is a $32.1 million below the original budget estimate. The most significant generators of revenue for fiscal 2019-2020 payroll taxes accounting for $465 million, or 42.8% of total revenue. And in 2019, that number was $467.5 million, or 42.7%. And customs duties accounting for $221.9 million, or 20.4%, versus in 2019, $226.1 million, or 20.7%. Current expenses for fiscal 2019-2020 were $1.392 billion versus 2019 of $1.187 billion. Four largest components of current expenses were employee costs, grants and contributions, the Morgan's Point Caroline Bay valuation allowance, and interest on debt. Total employee costs were $558.5 million, or 40.1%, versus 2019 of $550.1 million, or 46.3% total expenses. Included in this amount is $78.1 million of non-cash retirement benefit expenses versus $78.52 in 2019. Grants and contributions for $323.9 million, or 23.3%, versus 2019 of $319.2 million, or 26.9%. Interest on debt was $120.5 million, or 8.7%, versus 2019 of $124 million, or 10.4%. Morgan's Point Caroline Bay valuation allowance totaled $183.3 million and was deemed appropriate due to the significant measurement of uncertainty in the valuation of amounts expected to be ultimately recovered by the government. Total current expenditure on a modified cash basis was $1.05 billion versus 2019 $1.11 billion, which was $5.44 million more than the adjusted budget for 2018-19, or 7.9%. million less. Speaker, total capital account cash expenditure was $67.1 million, which was $2.4 million higher than the original budget estimates. Total capital and current account cash expenditures for 2019-20 was $1.119 billion, which was $7.8 million, or 0.7% higher than the original budget estimate of $1.111 billion. Mr. Speaker, the all-inclusive results from the government's operations, both capital and current, on an accounting accrual basis for the year ending the 31st of March 2020 was a deficit of $346.2 million, $222.8 million higher than the prior year's deficit of $123.3. This is due primarily to the valuation allowance for the Caroline Bay project and the first-time provision for doubtful collections of amounts owed to the consolidated fund by other public sector funds or organizations. If we remove the non-appropriated expenses and the non-recurring items related to the Caroline Bay project, the modified cash basis all-inclusive results for government operations, the same basis used in the budget book, was a deficit of $32.5 million. Original estimates forecasted a budget surplus of $7.4 million. Therefore, the actual deficit was up by $40.7 million when compared to the original estimate. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the Auditor General and her team, the persons in the Accountant General's Department, and those in other ministries who were involved in ensuring a successful audit. These statements provide valuable information on the financial position of the government, and I would encourage the public to examine these statements. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Education. Minister of Education?
Okay, Mr. Speaker, just waiting for my video to come up.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see you and hear you now. You can continue.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today I rise with my honorable colleagues and the community at large. I want to provide an update on the impact of COVID-19 on our public schools. Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, I made a decision to close our public schools early for the Easter break, and that will now start on Monday, March 29th, instead of Thursday, April 1st. Let me say that the decision to close our schools is never an easy one, and it directly affects, distresses, and disrupts our children's learning, and those parents who must work and who are not positioned to stay home and care for their children. Yet, if this was a proactive decision that needed to be made out of an abundance of caution to ensure the continued safety and health of students, school staff, and parents. Mr. Speaker, as a parent with a child in the Bermuda public school system, I am well aware of the anxiety our parents are facing. This new variant of the COVID-19 has given us a different experience than what we had in December. This variant appears to be transmitted easier and affects our children more. As a parent, I fully understand that concern, as it was only last week I had to explain to my daughter how a nasopharyngeal test works, as she and all of her classmates at Whitney Institute had to be tested. Thankfully, she and all that were tested on that day were negative. The decision made to start the Easter break early was a difficult one, as I truly believe our children deserve to be inside our school building. However, the evidence, the data, and the psychological impact of where we are as an island were all taken into account when this decision was made. Mr. Speaker, in September 2020, when our public schools opened, strict safety and health measures were implemented. The entry to exit safety and health protocols were comprehensive documents provided for each school level, from preschool to senior school, with the purpose of keeping our children and school staff safe. The protocols aimed to, 1, provide safety and health guidelines for schools' operations, and 2, keep sick students and staff out of school buildings. Mr. Speaker, the concept of bubbles was introduced in the schools as a safety measure, in that students interacted only with the same students and teachers during the course of the school day. I am pleased to say that continuous adherence to these safety and health measures at each respective school have kept our students and school staff safe for the most part. As such, Mr. Speaker, the recent outbreak of COVID in some of our public schools due to the poor behavior of adults is extremely disappointing. We all know what happens in schools to some extent is a reflection of what is happening in the community. If there is a COVID outbreak, it's just a matter of time before this seeps into the schools, which is what has happened. Mr. Speaker, as of Wednesday this week, all students and staff in 3 public schools have been quarantined. These include Northlands and Purvis Primary Schools and Delwood Middle School. Other schools that have had classroom students or cohorts and teachers and or other school staff in quarantine include Devonshire Preschool, West Pembroke, Paget, and Elliott Primary Schools, and Whitney Middle School. These reflect, in the most part, classroom bubbles. As informed by the Ministry of Health, the concept of bubbles allows the technical officers in the epidemiology and surveillance unit better understand who is at risk, that is, the close versus casual contacts, and better target actions towards the specific groups to minimize disruption in schools. Mr. Speaker, when a COVID-19 exposure occurs in schools, the bubble quarantines instead of the entire school. This is based on a risk assessment taken by the Ministry of Health. Teachers quarantine with the students in their bubble, and this lessens the impact on school staffing. As such, schools are able to remain open and continue with a hybrid learning model. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Education has been strictly guided by the Ministry of Health regarding COVID matters in schools. We know that COVID-19 is not going anywhere anytime soon. The Ministry of Health is ably leading the island through this pandemic and has also developed a plan for managing COVID-19 exposures in our schools. We know that their decisions are based on data, science, and a strategy that in the end leads to continued learning and what is best for Bermuda's children. At this time, I acknowledge and extend appreciation to the work of all staff in the Epidemiology and Surveillance Unit, or ESU, under the leadership of the Chief Medical Officer. They continue to work day and night, keeping us abreast of any developments that occur in our schools. Mr. Speaker, let me say that the ministry is very much understanding of the heightened fear and concern that arises in the community when there is an increase in the number of COVID cases. The same is experienced in our school, when school staff are informed of a positive case in the school, and the ESU commences an assessment of their respective school. The automatic concern is, how have I been affected? Mr. Speaker, this is a normal reaction for all of us. No one is exempt. As we continue to send communication out to parents and staff, the Ministries of Health and Education will work together to enhance the communication by providing additional information so that persons understand or are clear if they have been close or casual contacts with the infected. Additionally, Health is developing an information webpage soon to be launched, showing which schools have been affected, a list of frequently asked questions, and also a detailed explanation of the importance and effectiveness of the bubbles. Mr. Speaker, you will recall that an Education Emergency Measures Committee meeting, or EEMC, was established back in December last year, with the goal to immediately stand in the event of one or more COVID cases or related occurs in schools. Last week, Thursday, March 18th, the EEMC stood to discuss the rise in the number of COVID cases in our schools. During the meeting, a new policy was agreed upon to help alleviate the concerns and fears expressed by school staff. This policy came into effect immediately and stipulated that saliva testing will be undertaken as soon as practicable and within a day if possible when a COVID exposure had been detected within a school. Mr. Speaker, a saliva test is a screening tool used to detect a potential COVID-19 infection. The testing is an extra layer to catch any potential infections within casual contacts. Those are students and staff who are deemed not a close contact of affected individuals or bubbles. The saliva testing is carried out as a proactive preventative measure for all students and staff remaining at a school. where a class or cohort of students and school staff have been placed on quarantine. Following the saliva staff, any persons identified as a potential positive must be tested using a nasopharyngeal or throat swab to confirm the saliva test results. Mr. Speaker, thus far, saliva administered at Elliott for 89 students, Paget for 94 students, Purvis for 138 students, and West Pembroke for 117 students. As a result of the confirmed COVID-19 exposure at these schools, out of the total of 448 persons screened, there was only one potential positive case at Elliott Primary. Mr. Speaker, this preventative measure is being expanded as a screening tool and a regimen of testing proactively in schools across the system, instead of waiting for notification of a potential COVID-19 exposure. This week, Victor Scott, Prospect, and Gilbert Primary Schools have been scheduled as part of this expanded use of the screening via saliva testing. A schedule to have those screenings done on a routine basis will be developed over the Easter break and introduced when in-school learning commences on April 12th. Mr. Speaker, we commend the government's molecular diagnostic lab team under the leadership of Dr. Karika Weldon for their swift response to support schools in the organization and administration of these saliva tests within a day of a COVID exposure in a school. Mr. Speaker, let me also share additional measures that have been put in place to enhance the safety and health of students and school staff. The EEMC approved a mask-wearing policy in schools. The policy details the purpose of the policy, the associated risks if the policy is not followed, and the procedures that will follow for non-compliance or refusal to wear masks by students and staff. Mr. Speaker, additionally, stemming from the last Cabinet COVID committee meeting, the Ministry of Education has developed questions to include on the Ministry of Health's travel authorization form. The questions ask travelers if they have any children or contact with children and the schools attended so that follow-up can be undertaken to determine if the children must follow the Ministry of Health's return to school protocol before being allowed to attend school. The intent is to catch any potential COVID exposure at the front end. Mr. Speaker, the question of Easter camps have been brought to my attention after the announcement to extend the Easter break. Mr. Speaker, I wish to point out that large gathering limit is currently at 10, which would apply to camps or anything of that nature. While schools are exempt from this 10-person limit, camps, dance classes, weekend events with children or students, and the like are not exempt. The Department of Health has guidelines for running camps, and I encourage the public to ensure that any camp that may be running during Easter break is doing so under these guidelines. Mr. Speaker, there has also been reports of persons who should be on quarantine out and about in the community. The current surge in infections we are experiencing is a direct result of persons flaunting the rules that have been put in place. I honestly understand the COVID fatigue that people feel during this pandemic. I urge these persons to think about our island home and all of us here who want to get back to normalcy level just as they wish. However, unless we strictly follow the Ministry of Health's guidelines and instructions for quarantining so that Bermuda remains safe, we move further from normalcy. We have seen for what has transpired in the last few weeks, it actually only takes one person's actions to set us back. Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, COVID-19 is not going anywhere anytime soon. If the safety and health measures are followed consistently, the spread and transmission will be reduced. All school staff are considered essential workers, but only 625 educators from both public and private have been vaccinated since the end of February. We are working collaboratively with the Ministry of Health and the Bermuda Union of Teachers to encourage more school staff to get vaccinated over the extended Easter break, and also take advantage of the Ministry of Health's offer to schools to test school staff on a monthly basis using saliva screening testing. I also ask parents to be diligent in impressing on their children the importance of hand washing, mask wearing, and maintaining 6-foot physical distancing when in and out of school. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I extend my thanks to the members of the ESU, the Department of Communications, the Commission of Education, our technical officers, and our school principals of affected schools who have worked diligently during the recent weeks and who have sacrificed their personal and family time during weekends and evenings communicating to parents, stakeholders, and the general public about the COVID-19 impact on our schools. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, I'm going to seek your indulgence at this moment to have the Minister of Finance table the paper communication that he was not available for earlier. Minister of Finance? Would you like to seek the indulgence of your colleagues?
Please, Mr. Speaker.
Members?
Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly financial statements of the Consolidated Fund ending March 31, 2020. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. That brings a close to the statements. And now on reports of committees, there are none. This morning, members, we have on our order paper Premier's questions. And just as a reminder, the Premier's questions is 30 minutes separate from the regular question period. And we will start the 30-minute clock now. Just a minute. I understand that we have members from both sides who wish to ask questions. And the protocol is that we allow the opposition leader to put his question first. Opposition leader, would you like to put your question now as we start our 30 minutes? Opposition leader?
Coming on.
Okay. Yes.
Do you hear me, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah.
I hear and see you. Continue.
My first question to the Premier. Given that we are seeing a spike in cases, the community is very, very concerned, what criteria will be required by the government to put the country in full lockdown to address the spread of this virus?
Premier?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honorable Opposition Leader for his question. What I would say is that I share the concern of what the Honorable Opposition Leader has, and also the concern of the community with this recent spike. Regarding the measures of which would be taken, we would see if we would get to a place where we believe that we would get to sustain community transmission, of which we do not believe that we have right now. The measures of which we put into place and the current restrictions which we put into place will be in place for another 2 weeks, and we believe that we'll be able to control the spread. What's most important is for all persons to note, observe, and understand. It seems that the UK variant, as the CMO has indicated, has some different symptomology. Some of the symptoms, which we're talking about, cough and loss of taste, and other things. Cough and loss of taste. With this virus, with this variant, people are having runny noses and sore throats and other things, which they're mistaking for other seasonal items, and which is contributing to the spread. Once persons and individuals, which Bermuda has been very good at doing, obeys the advice, make sure that we keep our distance from persons, continue to sanitize and all the rest, we do believe that we'll be able to get past this spike without any further restriction. But if we do see that the matters are increasing, there are and published guidelines on our website which speak to the things which are necessary in order to roll back, whether or not we begin to have an increase in hospital admissions, etc. That's where we go. But right now, as we know, hospital admissions are at 0. They are a lagging indicator. And with our vaccination program, which has been relatively successful, we're hoping that we'll be able to maintain the current level of restrictions, and we're hopeful that we will not have to implement further ones. However, if necessary, we will do so. And as always, I will happily consult with the Leader of the Opposition if we get to that point.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary, Opposition Leader?
Yes. So
supplementary?
For the edification of the public, one of the criteria, 2 criteria could be the number of hospitalization cases, and 2, the number of new cases for each month or each week. If they increase, those two could be a possible criteria. The increase in cases and the increase in the number of those people hospitalized. Would that be correct?
Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's a number of other measures that are done. They are published on the website, coronavirus.gov.bn. They do indicate cases. They also indicate hospitalizations, ICU admissions, and capacity. They also take into account PPE on island, testing supplies, and all of those items. So there's a very broad measure which is located on the website, which speaks about the lag measures and the lead measures. Right now, certainly, we are seeing a spike. We are seeing a spike of cases significantly. We've reported a significant number of cases this week. We're expecting to report a significant number of cases for the next few days. What is different in this outbreak than the other outbreak that we had in November is that many of these cases are related. We're getting cases of entire households and other things like that. So from that perspective, it is, I don't want to say it's not as widespread. The numbers are high because we test a significant amount of persons, certainly, and making sure that we cast a very wide net so that we can catch things. But I would say that the measures are published on the coronavirus website, and those are what the government refers to. And certainly, as we've seen an increase in the number of cases, which are far and above where we want to be, that is a reason why we have certainly gone to the first stage of reversal. But we'll look to see if we have any future hospitalizations. And then if we get to a place where the healthcare capacity of the country is overwhelmed, then we may look to make further restrictions. But we do not believe we're going there at this point in time. It's key to note, Mr. Speaker, that the healthcare system and the overwhelm of the healthcare system is not just the hospital, but it's also the vaccination program, the contact tracers, and all the measures inside of public health, which are essential. And those are all the measures which we watch. And when those begin to get stressed, then that's when we can begin to look and see if any further restrictions are needed or necessary.
Thank you. You allow one more supplementary. You have a new supplementary, Officer Leader, or a new question?
New question.
New question, question number 2. Continue.
The community is also uncomfortable and very concerned that those irresponsible people who are breaking the curfew laws and violating the quarantine and hosting private events, and they feel that they are not being punished. I've seen that there is a disparity between the files, the Bermuda Police Service is sending files to the DPP, and the DPP saying that those files are incomplete. Can the minister speak to what has been done to address the challenges in the DPP's office and the Bermuda Police Service so that the people who are violating COVID laws, violating the gathering limits and the quarantine regulations, what can be done to make sure that they are brought to justice more effectively, quickly, and promptly?
Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would say that I share the opposition leader's concern and the concern of the members of the public in regards to some of the enforcement actions which may be taking place and the delay of bringing persons before the courts. As the Honorable Opposition Leader would know, that neither the Bermuda Police Service nor the Department of Public Prosecutions lies under the operational control of the government of Bermuda. And so in my role and in my audiences with Her Excellency, the Governor, I have raised this matter. And I would ask the Honorable Opposition Leader, as he's appointed by the same person who I'm appointed by, Her Excellency the Governor, if he wishes to raise the matter as well. I was incredibly concerned to see the news reports of a public spat basically earlier this week where the DPS was accusing one side and the BPP was going back and forth in the press. That's not the way it needs to happen. We need to be in a place where we can work together, and I would hope that the administration of justice angles which fall under Government House will be able to work more effectively together. And I have expressed those concerns, and I hope that the opposition leader will join me in expressing those concerns, because I do believe that we need to certainly, that a better job needs to be done on the side of the Bermuda Police Service and the DPP. That much being said, the fixed penalty regime, which I know the Honorable Opposition leader, as I spoke to earlier today, will assist us in swifter action and penalties and fines. But the fact is that the regime of which we have right now is stronger, and it is hoped and expected that those persons will appear before the courts in due course. And I know that there's additional files which have been submitted, and I hope to see persons before the courts soon. But I will agree with the opposition leader that it is a concern to me as well.
Thank you, Premier. Opposition leader, do you have a supplementary, or you want to do your third question?
Yes, I'll just say to them,
Supplementary?
no, before my question, I will be working.
Just questions.
I know. He just raised a comment that I'd just like to respond to. That's all. He can be assured of my support in regards to talk to the governor in addressing the enforcement matter.
Thank you.
The next
question now. Your third question?
Yes. My question pertains to sporting events. There is concern in regards to upcoming sporting events and the protocols in place to protect the community. Now, as you know, football season is almost come to an end because people aren't allowed to congregate. The same applies to cricket. The same applies to our equestrian events because of the gatherings and the size allowed at one spot. We've had the cancellation of the Carifta Games, and the question is, where do we stand with the upcoming sailing event? People are very, very concerned that we have to cancel our local events, and yet the sailing event is moving ahead as normal. Can the Premier speak to why is this being allowed, or what mitigation factors have been put in place to ensure that if the event moves ahead, the community is protected and they do not make a contribution to the rise in COVID cases in this country?
Premier?
Thank you very much to the Honorable Opposition Leader for his question. Just a few measures of clarity that need to be given. First of all, the government, prior to the current spike in cases, did give football permission to proceed in the exact same way as in previous times we had given many local sports permission to proceed. Permissions for sports are based upon the risk of the individual events and what risks they pose. To get to the core of the Honorable Opposition Leader's question, on the matter of which he speaks to regarding SailGP, to say that SailGP is going forward as normal would be a complete misnomer and not accurate. As the Honorable Opposition Leader would know, that there was scheduled to be a, I think, outdoor viewing at Cross Island, a $40 million gift from the former government. And I know you would like that one up. A $40 million gift from the former government. And that has been canceled due to the fact that it is unconceivable that we'd be able to be having large gatherings in 1 month when that event is scheduled to occur. So the opposition leader would not be accurate in saying that the event is going forward as is. What I can say is that the health protocols for arriving persons will be in place. Individuals will be regularly tested and they will be in bubbles, and they are not necessarily going around and different things. They will be under the same type of restrictions that apply to everyone else. But I think it's important to note that there are different types of sports. And in a sailing event like this, it is not a close contact sport. When you have a close contact sport, such as football, where you can see where people have to be next to each other, breathing on each other, mixing with different teams and all the rest, there can be more challenges, unlike what we see in this event. But the health protocols will certainly be maintained. The public event has been canceled, and the only watching will be from individuals who may be on the water or on the shore. But the big public event, which wanted to be held inside of Cross Island, is unable to proceed at this time.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary for that, Opposition Leader?
I have one supplementary.
Put your supplementary.
It is my understanding that an institution has put together a tourism package, private jet from Westchester County, New York to Bermuda into a hotel for a week and back out at the end of the week for this event. How are we going to, what protocols have we put in place in regards to private jets and those people that are coming in just for a few days and going back out? Are they going to be required to stay in some type of bubble? And what about the testing arrangement we have for those people that will come down for a week in a private jet for the event and go right back out at the end of the week? Because we're testing requirements, and I'd just like for the Premier to speak to that as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to answer. The testing requirements at our border are incredibly strict. The testing requirements apply whether or not you're in a private jet or a non-private jet. Everyone who enters the country must abide. Anyone who is not vaccinated upon arrival will receive a wristband that will restrict their items and movements. If you have a red wristband, for instance, and you just arrived, you will not be able to do indoor dining, you will not be able to be in large crowds, in large groups, which is the exact same restrictions that will happen whether you're in a private jet or a non-private jet. Everyone follows the same procedures, and we make sure that the same matters are applied no matter what the port of entry is speaking. And if there is information otherwise, I'm happy to know. But one thing that we want to do is that we want to make sure the rules are applied fairly. I do know that people who fly into the private jets test a jet facility, have doctors that will come and will put the thing up the nose, just like if you do when you arrive at the other very expensive gift left by the former government.
Thank you. Mr. Premier, thank you, Opposition Leader. It brought you to a close of your 3 questions. The next member I have on the list this morning is MP Terrell. MP Terrell, would you like to put your question?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Yes.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, recently the government awarded capital grants to community clubs, including awards to 3 historically black sailing clubs. Does the Honorable Premier agree with me that this money is a sound investment in the future and will go a long way to not only making the club sustainable, but also providing jobs in our community?
Thank you. Mr. Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honorable member for his question and highlighting this particularly important issue. One of the things that is important that the government has committed to certainly is to make sure that we support our community clubs and our community organizations. I remember prior to the 2017 election that I was talking about the amount of money that was being spent on the America's Cup. And my thought was that if we can find money for that, why can't we find money to invest in our community sporting organizations? And that, Mr. Speaker, is exactly what we've done. So while at the same points in time, the Bermuda Tourism Authority has given sponsorship for this LGP event, which they felt would be an excellent investment, and the government supported their decision in that regard, and it came out of their existing budgets, not additional budgets. At the same time, what we made sure is that we provided money not only to our community clubs, but in this specific instance, our historically black sailing clubs. That's East End Mini Yacht Club, Mid-Atlantic Boat Club, and West End Sailboat Club, with grants so they can upgrade their facilities as we continue to promote yacht tourism, as we continue to promote boat tourism, as we continue to demonstrate our maritime heritage. We will demonstrate that our maritime heritage is not just sailing ships and mega yachts, but it is also our maritime heritage, rich in history in Bermuda, full of black sailors and the contributions of which they have made. And our sporting clubs and our historically black sailing clubs are a very good example of that. On a broader level, Mr. Speaker, the commitment of which we've made has provided numerous jobs. When you look across the country, whether it be Harrington Workmen's Club down there in Devil's Hole in the honorable member for constituency number 7's constituency, and the work and the upgrades which they've been able to make that place, whether or not we go to the west, Mr. Speaker, close to your home at the Somerset Creek Club, insofar as the replacement of their floor, which they're having issues with, and the support of which they'll get from the government of Bermuda, that, or whether it's way down in the East End for the St. George's Cricket Club and clubs in between, Mr. Speaker. The fact is that it is important that the government supports these community organizations as they go ahead, so they do not have to rely solely on alcohol sales, and to make sure that we can make them sustainable in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Terrell, you're entitled to a supplementary, not a further question, but do you have a supplementary?
I do have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Just supplementary?
Firstly, I thank the Premier for his extensive response. Can the Honourable Premier please speak to other support that may be provided to community clubs that can assist them in becoming sustainable in the long run?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the question. Thank the honourable member for this question because it is a good point. There is one thing about giving one-time capital grants and assistance to develop clubs, but it's a question of the long-term sustainability. And that is one of the things that Bermuda Economic Development Corporation has been focused on, ensuring the long-term sustainability of the sporting clubs, whether it's for the provision of accounting assistance or whether it's for the provision of upfront loans in order to invest in alcohol beverage control equipment, which will enable the clubs to manage their inventory better and to make sure they have better revenue as they go forward and better accounting controls on their items. Those are some of the challenges, Mr. Speaker. I have been in club life before, as I'm sure a number of members have been, and those are the things in which we are working with community clubs to ensure that they can be sustainable over the long term. I had a conversation recently with the newly elected president of the Bailey's Bay Cricket Club. His name is Mr. Stephen Outerbridge on this exact topic, Mr. Speaker, and the government has committed to supporting the Bailey's Bay Cricket Club through the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation with a loan to make sure that they can go ahead and put in place alcohol beverage control equipment, which will see them be more sustainable in the long run, reduce wastage, and also make sure that they can increase their revenues.
Thank you, Member Terrell and Premier. The next member I have on my list this morning would be MP Pearman. MP Pearman, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you see me and hear me?
I can see you and I can hear you.
Fantastic. Picking up on a point from the opposition leader, Honorable Premier, are you able to tell us whether there have been any successful prosecutions for breach of the COVID regulations since the commencement of COVID?
I can answer the question.
Premier?
Sorry, I can answer the question by saying yes, there have been.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Supplementary, yes.
Honorable Premier, are you able to give us a rough estimate of how many successful prosecutions there have been in terms of tens or 20s or hundreds?
Speaker Shaw?
Yeah, see, the question is, can you give a number? Is that it?
Yeah, a rough number, a rough estimate.
Rough number.
Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 100?
Mr. Speaker, I do not have that information off the top of my head, but I am aware that there have been successful prosecutions. I think the one that I know about is for parties that were held over the summer that were in violations of the meetings, and the organizers, I think, were prosecuted. But I don't know of other matters. Of course, during emergency powers, I know there are people that were brought before the courts for curfew violations and violations of shelters in place. So I don't know the exact number. I'm happy to, the question should certainly be directed to the DPP's office and from the police side. But if the Honorable Minister wants to submit a written question on that, I'm sure the government can find the answer specifically on it.
Thank you.
Second question.
No, you only allow one question, one supplementary.
Thank you.
On the previous question. Yes. The next member on the list this morning is MP Famous. MP, would you like to put your question?
Morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
Morning, can you see me?
Actually, before I do that, my fault. You are, Mr. Perry, you are allowed two supplementaries. One question with two supplementaries. Did you want to put a supplementary or a new question?
I thought it was two questions, but
No, one question, two supplementaries.
The opposition leader got three. I noticed Mr. Tyrrell got two.
The opposition leader gets three questions and two supplementaries to each question. But all other members get one question and two supplementaries. So if you have a supplementary, you will take your supplementary.
I won't eat up further. I won't eat up further time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Famous, MP Famous, you have your question?
Morning, Mr. Speaker, can you see me?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, this is the one day you're going to see me in red, Manchester United. Mr. Speaker.
You can wear blue today for City. Okay,
We know order. Mr. Speaker, one of the government's primary pledges in this election manifesto, which we all walked around with in that platform, was to implement a national digital bank. Can the Honorable Premier please update the Honorable House on if there's any progress on this important initiative? The people really want to know.
Thank you. Premier?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honorable member for his question. As the National Digital Bank is certainly a priority of this government. What I can confirm to the honorable member is that the work has commenced. A team has been put together who is leading this initiative with individuals from not only the Ministry of Finance, but also from the Cabinet Office. The stakeholder consultation is about to commence. The stakeholder consultation will be broad, not only with our local banking sector and the Bermuda Monetary Authority, but also our local international business sector, our local business sector, the Chamber of Commerce, in addition to our union partners who are going to be instrumental in this initiative as well. So the work has commenced. There will also be briefings I'm happy to share with the honorable member for not only members of the government side, but also members of the opposition. As I know that a lot of people have questions over what the National Digital Bank will offer and what it will be. But I think, Mr. Speaker, as we see that the world of fintech is expanding, as we're seeing that there are different services that can be offered that provide lower rates for financing for individuals and higher rates of returns for savings of individuals, I think that it is important that Bermuda strike out and move early. That was the visionary commitment of which we made in our election manifesto. And as of March, we're expected to have a full business plan for the National Digital Bank by the summer, and I'm certain that will be delivered in July. So we'll be able to have a full business plan on how the country can advance, and we'll answer a lot of the questions I know which people have.
Mr. Speaker,
Thank you. Do you have the supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. One
What's your supplementary?
Now that, thank you for the Premier's answer. Now that is explained the progress of it, would he be so kind and gracious as to explain in layman's terms to the listening audience what is a national digital bank, because many people are not quite familiar with the concept.
Amen.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his question. The concept of the National Digital Bank is that right now we have traditional banks inside the country, and there are new types of banks that are emerging in the future. And those are ones that are operated on different platforms that are digital banks insofar as they use technology and they're built on technology at their core. The fact is, for instance, we have vendors in Bermuda, we have small business in Bermuda that cannot access international digital services, such as PayPal, to receive those type of funds and to be able to make sure that they transact in the digital economy well. In addition, the view from the government of Bermuda is that every individual person will be able to own shares in the National Digital Bank. Every Bermudian will be offered the opportunity to do so and to make sure that we help to build a nation of owners. This means that if you might have your mortgage at the National Digital Bank in the future and you are paying your mortgage, you're paying an interest rate, which we hope that will provide additional banking competition in the country. At a point in time, you will also receive the dividend from your ownership stake. I think that building a nation of owners is important. And one of the core tenets of the National Digital Bank is that ownership will be available and open to members of the public, and every Bermudian will be given an opportunity to own a piece of that bank. Whereas right now, most of our local banks are owned by persons that are not in Bermuda, whether they be overseas entities or whether they be listed publicly on the New York Stock Exchange or other international exchanges. But at the core, Mr. Speaker, it is a financial institution that is owned by Bermudians that will be able to provide competition in the market and open access to digital services that Bermudians currently do not have access to.
Thank you, MP Famous and Premier. The next member who is on the list is MP Dunkley. MP Dunkley, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. I'd like to return to the pressing pandemic we have of COVID. Mr. Speaker, in light of 201 cases announced just in March alone, in the last 2 days, there have been 40 cases and 34 cases. And of those cases, 10 have been under investigation of the 40 and 18 under investigation of the 34. Government always talks about local transmission. Can the Honorable Premier please define local transmission versus community transmission?
Premier?
Happy to make the distinction. Local transmission is a definition of how the transmission happens. So there's only two types of transmission. There's imported, where the case was imported and where someone has a link to travel, or there's local transmission where someone has been identified to contract that case locally. If someone has not returned from travel, it is assumed that they have contracted that case locally. They may have contracted from a traveler, they may have contracted from someone else. What community transmission is, and the definition of the community transmission, is if there are multiple cases of local transmission that cannot be linked to the source. Now, I want to caution the honorable member because he raises the issue of cannot be linked to another person. I'm sorry. So local transmission. I see the confused look on your face, MPW. So let me help. Local transmission is
not confused. I'm just listening and looking.
Okay. If I was to transmit to one person or another, that would be local transmission. And if I am, for instance, in a household or a workplace, you know where the contact was, or someone who was positive, they were quarantined, their contacts were quarantined, and then their contacts tested positive, that would be classified as local transmission of a known case, but it is locally acquired, the case is locally acquired. What I think is important to note is just because the under investigation number is growing at the rates at which it is, it should be noted that the under investigation number is a function of the resources that the Department of Health will have to assign people to investigate. So, for instance, a link can become apparent in a day or two, but as we're putting out the report, they're putting out the report at the time in which they get the case. So, for instance, the cases may come in from the lab at 12 o'clock. The report is prepared at 4. The people who were in
Mr. Premier, I take that sign reminding me that the 30 minutes is up. I didn't realize it going that quickly myself. That's 30 minutes allowed for the Premier's question. We'll now move on to a new 60 minutes for questions from the regular question period. And there are no written questions this morning, so the questions for the regular question period will come from today's statements that were given by ministers. And we have 3 members who wish to ask questions this morning. The first statement from the Minister of Finance, the MP Swan. MP Swan has indicated that he would like to put a question, and I will start at 60 minutes. MP Swan, put your question to the minister.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Speaker. Members of the opposition used to always speak about fintech in a negative manner, and can the member update the Honorable House on the progress Bermuda is making in the fintech area? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, Mr. Premier. I'm sorry, Mr. Minister of Finance. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Speaker, I thought the questions were limited to the statement that I gave this morning.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that was my point of order. I think the question period to the Premier has ended.
Yeah, no, this question is for the statements. That's why I corrected myself. I did call the Premier. I used to call on the Premier for the last 30 minutes. But we're now at the statements. And the question that Mr. Swan has indicated in the chat here is, MP Swan, you indicated you had a question for the Minister of Finance. That's why I put you down.
And the Minister of Finance said it's not relevant.
And here, I'm going through my chat list again. From MP Swan. Okay. All right. MP Swan, I'll take it that your question is being withdrawn.
I had a question.
And we have the minister, the opposition leader. We'll move on to your question for the Minister of Finance.
Hello?
Yes, you can put your question to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question evolves around the consolidated financial statements. And I'll go on the record in saying that this is not a current problem. This has been a problem for a while. And it has been on a number of audit reports. And so I'm interested in to see what plans does the Minister of Finance have in regards to a roadmap to begin to address the delivery of the consolidated financial statements. I would say this, we in the Public Accounts Committee are working on that as well, and we'll be happy to work with a team if it's willing to appoint one. So can the minister provide a roadmap on how he intends to address the perennial challenge of producing consolidated financial statements?
Thank you. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not an accountant and have never had the responsibility for producing financial statements other than for a small family trust, which I think I stopped doing after the first couple of attempts at it. What I will say is that I fundamentally believe that we have a bit of a capacity problem. And given the number of financial statements that are outstanding, I think it's the proverbial drinking from the fire hydrant in trying to get current on them. So my approach to resolving the issue will be to look to get external assistance in helping us to work through the backlog. I had committed about a year ago in this House to work to address this challenge. And while I don't want to use COVID as an excuse, certainly the pandemic last year has focused our energies in other places, and the energy that should have been probably focused on this issue was not. I can commit that over the course of the next 12 months, we will get some external assistance that can help us bring these financial statements more current.
Supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
Would the Minister of Finance be amenable to working with the PAC and helping the ministry to address this problem? Because we will be looking at it as well. And so it makes no sense us working in parallel. So would he be willing to have his team work with us in addressing this issue in regards to the consolidated financial statements?
Minister?
Mr. I am more than willing to work with the Public Accounts Committee. I think it is an expectation for the occupant of this seat to work with that body anyway. And so, in as much as there's insights that can be gleaned from collaborating, I'm certainly willing to work with folks. I can tell you that I have been persistently or perpetually disappointed in the current state of affairs with respect to the outstanding financial statements, and I believe that we should be setting an example. And so, in as much as we can get this resolved largely over the course of the next 12 months, the better.
Thank you. Do you have a further question?
No, I have no further questions, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Minister, there's another member who wishes to put a question to you in reference to your statement, and that is the MP Pearman. MP Pearman, would you like to put your question?
You're on mute.
Yeah, MP, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies. Can you now see me and hear me, Mr. Speaker?
We hear you, but we don't see you this time. Now we see you. There you go.
I'm grateful. Honorable Minister of Finance, you mentioned during your statement the concern or the observation by the auditor about how the consolidated financial statements don't show the full position. Is that a structural issue that you intend to address, and if so, how? Thank you.
Minister?
Speaker, I believe the Auditor General's comment relates to the observation that the consolidated financial statements do not represent the consolidated picture of the government by virtue of the fact that there are certain financial statements that have yet to be prepared and a number that are outstanding. And so I believe that that issue gets resolved with the completion of the outstanding financial statements. Therein, she can have a set of financials for each requisite period that are totaled to provide a fully consolidated view of the position of government. This has been an issue, I think, that's been outstanding for a long time, and I think the observation has probably been made by successive Auditor Generals with respect to the consolidated financial statements.
Thank you, Mr.
Supplementary?
No supplementary, and it's a fair observation, and that was the point I was asking about. I have a second question. I do. Honorable Finance Minister, you gave us a lot of different numbers during your statement, all of which were helpful. But just for the benefit of the listening audience, what is our current debt position, both gross debt and net debt, on your most recent calculation?
According to the Public Loans Act, the gross debt number is $3.35 billion, and the net debt number is just slightly less than $3 billion.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
No supplementary? No more questions? Good. We'll now move on to the statement. Obviously, last time we had a question for you, Minister, so we'll move on to the next statement. The next statement this morning that has questions is that of the Minister of Works. Minister Works, MP Kennedy has a question for you. MP, would you like to put your question?
Just trying to get my, okay, there we go. Make sure my camera came up.
Yeah, we can see you and hear you.
Thank you very much. On page 1, the Minister Birch mentions about the challenge that the small to medium-sized businesses are having, and he mentions the challenge of cash flow. And knowing this all too well, is there any provisions, or has it come up for some of these works that provision be made where supplies might be purchased by government to assist with these guys' cash flow, who may not be able to, for whatever project, come up with the monies for all of the project or its needs?
Minister?
The short answer is yes. In some cases, the projects that are being engaged, as an example, the railings along the highways and byways, we have a significant number of those that we have not been able to get to over the last couple of years. We are purchasing the materials for that, and we'll provide that to any successful bidder.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Yes, the Minister mentioned, thank you, mentioned that they have an aggressive schedule where they've worked out that these small to medium-sized businesses would be paid every 2 weeks. And so is he saying that for some of these projects, it'll be an ongoing payment for them? For instance, maybe some will get half down, paid up at the beginning, and then a half paid at the end of the project. Can you give us an idea of some of the contractual payment plans that they have, some of these firms? That's making any sense to them.
Minister?
Be rather unique with contract construction companies.
Minister?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The short answer is that we are adapting to the actual needs of each individual case. As an example, if a contractor gets 2 or 3 of these sites for railings, that will take a lot less time than a contractor who gets the contract to outfit one of the Artemis buildings at the quarry. And so the aim here is to utilize the protocols that we've used at both at Redco, BLDC, and BHC, in the sense that many small contractors are employed by them. And in order to assist with cash flow, the protocol is that if the bills and all of the paperwork are submitted by Tuesday of a week, they will receive funding on the Friday. And so those arrangements will be made on an individual case-by-case basis with the contractor, depending on the type of work that's being asked to be done.
Thank you. Supplementary or further question?
Thank you.
That's it? Okay. Minister, I think that's the only member who had a question for you. The next statement from the Minister of Education. Minister, we actually have a couple of members who like to put a question to you. The first is MP Jackson. MP, would you like to put your question?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, Minister. I'm going to start on page 5. I'm interested in the health travel authorization form. My question to the Minister is, will these questions be added to the health travel authorization form sort of before, in order to capture any children who are returning from any spring or Easter vacations overseas?
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you for that question. So we have finalized the questions and submitted them. That is an interesting question. I thank you for that, and we will endeavor to have them added as soon as possible.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker.
It's a supplementary.
Thank you. Again, within the health travel authorization form paragraph on page 5, there's a statement of return to school protocols. And I'm just wondering whether this means that the Ministry of Education will be introducing quarantine and day 4, 8, and 14 testing for children.
Minister? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The return to school protocols have been in place since about January of this year, once the immunizations. And so they can be found on the government coronavirus website under travel, and it's very explicit of what has to happen if a child is in contact with someone who has traveled. There are very specific guidelines there. So there are in place for children, except the requirement of an 8-day negative test if ideally we want them to be out for 14 days, but a return can be had after an 8-day negative test by the student that's been in contact with someone who has traveled. But all of those protocols, as I said, they've been in place on the website since the beginning of this pandemic, and they've been updated as of January of this year to reflect immunizations that have been going on.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Yeah, just a quick
New question?
Yeah, and this is a supplementary, just clarifying. So if a student travels overseas, when they come back, are they going to be quarantined and then follow the health protocols of testing? If the student travels.
Oh, I was waiting for you to say good, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was trying to pick a mic up.
Perhaps my answer wasn't clear, but the travel protocols are a requirement for everyone who travels, and in addition to any student who just happens to be in a household of anyone who travels. So yes, the travel protocols are for anyone who travels and anyone who has direct contact with a student who may anyone travel that has direct contact with a student. Translation is if a parent travels and comes back, their student is not allowed in school until they've gone through the required protocols. And we want to add that to the travel authorization is there has been anecdotal evidence of parents traveling and still sending their children to school. And so it said it happens, and so what we want to do is capture that on the versus using the honor system. In the most part, parents have been keeping their children home if they've traveled, but we want to just put something formally in place so we can capture that data.
All right. Supplementary or new question?
Supplementary.
Seconds.
Supplementary.
Actually, you already had 2 supplements, so this would have to be your second question.
I tried. Yes, moving on. So this is just further up on the page 5. There is discussion about within the schools, the mask wearing policy and procedures that will be followed for non-compliance or refusal to wear masks by students and staff. I'm just curious, not to go into great detail, but the procedure for non-compliance. So what happens? What is that procedure if a student or a teacher does not comply with wearing a mask? What is that procedure?
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that question. During our discussions with the BUT, one of the things that they repeatedly raised was teachers feeling helpless or students not wearing masks properly or refusing to wear masks. So the policy was introduced to give guidelines of the sorts of responses to the various infractions. And some of that, and those infractions include ordering to wear the mask, to in-school suspensions, to actual suspension from school, and to the custody of the parent for not wearing masks. And the option with the teachers deals with the current disciplinary actions as negotiated in the CBA agreement between the BET.
Thank you.
Supplementary or?
No supplementaries. Do I get another question?
You have a third question, yes.
Okay. This is with regard to page 1, I believe, where students and families can be quarantined because of positive testing in the schools. And I'm just curious whether I know the general quarantine rules, but will the students then get tested on day 4, day 8, day 14? Will there be a testing regime? And the reason I'm asking, Minister, is that sometimes people don't test positive until like 14 days after.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister? Yes, you can go right ahead, Minister.
Again, thanks for that question. And that's where we also talked about in the statement of being of having our notices being a little bit clearer and having more detail. All letters that are sent out to schools, because they're not public domain and they're sent only specifically to the parents and the teachers who have to quarantine, all of them state, this is state 1, the date of exposure, the date that they have to report for their initial testing, and the day 14 date that they have to report for their mandatory testing, and that a positive test on the day 14 is the only indication they can return to school or exit quarantine. So that is something that is standard in all letters sent out from the Department of Health. Fortunately, those letters are not necessarily made public, but it is something that we understand needs to probably be added to the FAQs that I discussed in here, so people have a better understanding of what that process is. So the answer to your question is, whenever a class, a cohort, a bubble, a teacher, etc., has been determined that they have to quarantine by the Department of Health, there's a test that they have to take when they are quarantined, and there's a test they have to take on the day 14 after the initial exposure that they have to take, and a positive or a negative result from that day 14 test is required before they're allowed to return back to the school.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary for this?
Yes, I do.
Supplementary.
I'm just sort of working through because there are so many layers to this, but generally speaking, Minister, if a family unit has been quarantined because there is the suspicion of exposure, under what circumstances can any family member in that unit that's quarantined be allowed outside of the house? Like, how does that work?
Okay, and again, that's a very topical question. All letters that get sent out by the Department of Health concerning the quarantining, and Mr. Speaker, if you allow me to read directly from the letter of health.
Yes, go right ahead.
And it says, and I quote, "For children, main caregivers in close contact within the home who cannot separate from the children, i.e. separate bedroom and bathroom or no common spaces, must remain at home. Also members, including brothers and sisters, who are able to separate from the child in the home are not required to remain at home unless the child is experiencing COVID-19 symptoms or has a positive COVID-19 test." And so that is included in every letter that goes out. And in a nutshell, it states that if you can separate from the person who is being deemed to need to be quarantined in the home, you are allowed to leave the home and not be under the same quarantine measures. I think it's also important to point out that when we quarantine, what we've seen is 1 or 2 cases of actual positive tests within those bubbles, and not the entire bubble. But the entire bubble is, as you asked in your previous question, they are tested on day or the first time that it determined that they need to quarantine, and they're tested on day 14 after the what day it was determined their initial exposure is. So they are required to quarantine for that full time, and a negative test on the day 14 is what is required in order to quarantine. But if you can separate within your own home, and the child is not tested positive, but is only on quarantine out of precaution and is not showing any symptoms, you as a separate individual in that household can not be subject to the quarantine.
Thank you, Minister. Do you have a second supplementary?
Not today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm done.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. Minister, there's still other members who have questions for you. Minister, the next member is MP Dunkley. MP Dunkley, would you like to put your question at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First off, just let me thank everyone in education who's making the best of a very poor situation. The question to the Honorable Minister is, in light of last week, the last 3 reporting days saw 7, 18, and 22 confirmed cases of COVID. Did the government think that they underestimated the gravity of the situation to announce in-school learning would continue last week and only to change and reverse that decision earlier this week and to close schools?
Minister?
Thank you. And actually, no, I do not. The decision, as I said, to close schools early was based on the data, based on all of the information that had been collected, and also the psychological impact and it was having on our teachers. We announced that we put out a statement that said that this is what would guide our decision, and I do believe that the decision ultimately was made under those same guidance principles. This is one of those things that actually has the ability to change from day to day. But because we say something on Monday and we continue to monitor what's going on with the situation, the decision could change invariably by Wednesday. But the key to these decisions is to make them in such a way that they can be quantified and they can actually do what we necessarily needed to do, and that is to protect our students at the end of the day.
Thank you, Minister. Supplementary?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for the answer. Second question, not a supplementary.
Second question, no sub? Okay, second question.
Thank you, Speaker. Minister, this is in regards to compensation for those who have been forced to quarantine and for those parents who now have to miss work to take care of younger children now that the schools have closed early. What avenue do these people have to secure some type of compensation during this period when they're forced to be home and not able to work?
Minister?
And that is a good question. I thank that member for that question. And one of the things I do want to preference that with is, as we recognize that where we are with COVID, and as I said in the statement, what's happening in our community invariably ends up in our schools as well. Next week, our students would have been in school for 3.5 days because it was a half day Thursday. And when I took a look at the decision and I looked at the potential of someone having to be out for 14 days on quarantine versus finding some additional help for those 3.5 days, that was part of the decision process as well. 3.5 days of finding additional support for your child is a whole lot different than having 14 mandatory days of being out. But I do believe, and I would defer to the Premier, that there was an announcement that came out that we would be looking at how we could financially help persons affected by some of these shutdowns, expanding that process once again as we did last year. But I don't want to speak ahead of that, but I do believe I did receive some information that was going to happen.
Thank you, Minister. Is there a supplementary?
Just in brief response to that, I appreciate the minister saying he'd look into it, because I know, for example, there are government workers who have been forced to take special leave or annual vacation in this case. So I think it'd be something to look at. But that answers my question, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate your time.
Okay. Minister, the next member who's indicated to have questions for you is the opposition whip. Honourable member, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just waiting for my video to start. Okay. With respect to the matter raised by the minister in his statement, I believe on the second page, the minister spoke about the disruption to children's learning. And given that there's been disruptions both last year or last school term and this school term, would the Honorable Minister please clarify what those disruptions have been in terms of, is it just delayed curriculum? Have exam schedules been offset? And can he speak to what those disruptions have been so far in public school education? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thus far, it will be the 3.5 days that the children would have been in school next week. All previous stoppages were utilized. All previous stoppages, remote learning was utilized during those stoppages.
Supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the avoidance of doubt, the minister is saying that there's been no disruption to the learning schedule other than the 3.5 days of last week or this week coming.
That's your question complete, Minister? Minister?
I'm just. Oh, I didn't. I thought that was a comment and not an actual.
I was asking to you. Are you finished with your question there?
For the avoidance of doubt, yes. I sorry. I thought that was a question.
Okay, we can answer that.
Okay, the Minister, go ahead and respond, Minister.
As stated in the statement, the best possible place for our children to be is in school learning. However, we have done what we needed to do in terms of bringing in the remote learning process. There are processes in place to test, or well, not test, but actually see where our children are as a result of the various stoppages. But the question he asked was about the learning, and I was stating simply that in previous cases, when in-school learning was suspended, remote learning took its place, and that was what I was answering. Learning still occurred; it just wasn't occurring inside of the classroom. This is the only case where we are stopping early, but not providing remote learning in case. But what we have asked all of our schools to do is supply work packets for our children to work on during those 3.5 days that they will be out next week. It'll be slightly different from the work packets that you do when you're on remote, but we've just asked as an assistance to the parents while they're looking for something for the children to actually engage in and still have some form of learning, that work packets be sent to them for them to look into. But I mean, I would be remiss to say that there hasn't been some impact on some of our students because of some stoppages and the move to remote versus being in class. And so these will be handled on an individual basis. I think it's, I don't think I can answer right now each student individually where they are, but I will admit that there are some students have fallen behind because of the stoppages, and there are some students that have remained where they need to be. So a lot of this has to do with their engagement at home, the ability for the parents to actually assist with them and move forward. But we will always look to ensure that our students are kept up to date, and that will happen on an individual basis of when they're actually in the school, in the actual buildings.
Thank you, Minister. Is there supplementary?
I have a supplementary. Oh, sorry. Nope.
You can put your supplementary, MP.
Thank you. My supplementary is what support is academic or otherwise is being provided to students impacted by this social deprivation. I mean, the children are just devastated that they haven't had a chance to socialize, even more than the academics for the kids. What support services are being provided just generally to help children to navigate through this socially isolating environment at such a critical time?
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. That is an important question. The Commissioner of Education recognizes that social support has to be put in place for not just our students, but for our teachers as well. And she has put things in place. I honestly can't speak to them exactly what they are, but we have talked about it, and she always talks about the importance of. But things have been put in place to support not only the students, but to support the teachers as well, to get them through this thing that we're working on. So the psychological impacts can be devastating. I know last summer, like my daughter being in middle school, it was like, hey, I haven't seen my friends in forever. Can I see my friends? And so this is one of the pluses of having in-school learning. They do get to associate with their friends. They do get to get to see other people except for their parents who are at home. So yes, social mental support is in place for both the teachers and our students within our school system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Officer Whip, do you have a supplementary to your original question, or you want a second question?
Yes, would the Honorable Minister be able to tell us and
I didn't get, is this a supplementary to the original or a new question?
It's a supplementary.
Okay, yep.
Just as it relates to the exam schedules and any anticipated delay in curriculum delivery or children's learning, how will the ministry, or can the ministry, I should say, I'll give them the opportunity, can the ministry commit that the remediation from any disruption would take place prior to exams being delivered?
The simple answer to that has to be yes, and something not the Ministry of Education would undertake. That's the Department of Education's remit. And so I can endeavor to get more information on that for the honorable member if he does wish, and find out from the department what resources are being put in place to ensure that our students have the best opportunities for these exams, whether they be checkpoint exams or the moving forward with their Cambridge GCSE exams. As we do know, those exams have been suspended in the UK, but they've been allowed to be taken externally. So we will. I do believe that we will be moving forward with them at the end of the term, as we normally would do.
Thank you, Minister. That was your second sub. New question?
No questions for the Minister of Education. Thank you, Honorable Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member.
Thank you,
Minister. That brings us to a close of the question period this morning, and we'll now move on. The next item on the order paper this morning is congratulatory and obituary speeches. Would any member wish to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
That sounds like MP Fogo. MP Fogo, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to give condolences for Mr. Neil Painter Sr., the father of, I think everybody knows, the St. George's Cricket Club president, Neil Painter.
Associate me, please.
I was going to do that. I would like to associate the Honorable Kim Swan and the Honorable Renee Neal with these comments. Just suffice it to say, he is a St. George's figure that everybody knows and loves, and he will be sorely missed by his family members and for those who know him, by his friends and the St. George's community as a whole. I'd also like to just quickly mention his connection with the RAA in St. George's. He is a figure there as well, and so that family will also miss Neil Painter Sr. I also would like to give condolences for Mrs. Millett, the mother of Victoria and Cynthia Millett, and the loving wife of Mr. Harold Millett. Mrs. Millett came to Bermuda many, many years ago. She was wooed by Mr. Harold Millett. She met him on a cruise when she was very young with her mother, and at that point in time, there were very few pilots of color, but that is what connected her with Mr. Millett. They married, and she lived her life here in Bermuda with her husband. She was originally from New York. Mrs. Millett, who was my constituent, was an extremely, extremely smart woman. She made sure, she demonstrated that in her mothering and in ensuring that her daughters were well equipped educationally, and Cynthia being a lawyer and Victoria an accountant. And whenever I visited their house, she always engaged me intellectually. And as a Black woman, was very forward thinking, very progressive in her thinking, and very supportive, especially of women, but of Black people in particular, in moving forward and pushing us as a community to take our rightful place. So I would also like to associate, I believe, Minister Ming, because Cynthia is now.
Your 3 minutes are up. Remember, your 3 minutes are up. We thank you for your contribution. Does any other member wish to make a contribution?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
MP Kennedy, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to be associated with comments just made by the Honorable Member Fogo in reference to passing of Mr. Painter, Neil Painter. And I know that many in the room would know him well. I know our Minister of Education's father knows him very well as well. Neil Painter was, Uncle Painter, Neil was a personal best friend of my father's. And I can recall during some very troubling times back in the day for my father. Neil was there for myself, my sister, and my mother as we were young. And I can't say enough about the support that he had given during those times. And so to his family, I wake up every morning actually, and his house is right across from me. So it's the first place that I see when I get up mornings, and he will be missed. He also worked for a company that I've been affiliated for many years now, and that is ESSO. Like my father and my uncles who were at ESSO, he will be missed by the Cannonair family. For all of the wonderful relationships that he had with us, he will be sorely missed. So kudos go to the family for a wonderful man who made an impact in so many ways on the community of St. George's, and even ventured into St. David's to give his support there as well. And so I know that he will be sorely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP. Does any other member wish to make a contribution?
Mr. Speaker.
I'm trying to hear two voices. I think it's MP Famous. Is that you?
Simmons, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, MP Simmons. MP Simmons? Yeah, you have your 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a land where going along to get along is as much a national pastime as football and cricket, Jam Martin was a breath of fresh air. In a land where some equate activism with calling the talk show, writing letters to the editor, or posting on social media, Jam Martin was a breath of fresh air. Mr. Speaker, she passed this week, but she lays behind a legacy that I think should be celebrated. She took on those who lacked the courage to put their names and faces behind their offensive beliefs on social media. She stood up against those who would open the immigration floodgates and those who snuck into Parliament to sell off our airport. In a land where there is no much talk, there's so much talk, Jam Martin walked the walk. She risked arrest. She risked imprisonment. She risked economic repercussions. And few knew that she was also risking her life. Bermuda has lost a gem, and I hope for one will be replaced by 10 more like her. I pray for her family and hope that they are comforted, and that all who know her and love her never forget the work that she did for our country, the love she showed for her family, and the example she set. And Mr. Speaker, before I conclude, I'd like to be associated with the remarks related to my St. George's cousins, the Painter family, Mr. Neil Painter, his sister who passed this week, and to Mrs. Millett, who I knew quite well and was a wonderful woman, and I'm very shocked and saddened by her loss. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP. Does any other member wish to make a contribution?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
MP Swan? You have your 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to follow on with where the honorable member MP Simmons just concluded, and offer condolences to the Painter family. My good friend Neil Painter Jr.'s father, Mr. Neil Painter Sr. We would need to have about 10 wakes under COVID conditions only to get to about a quarter of the people that will turn out to that funeral. But earlier in the day that he passed, his sister, Glenda Elizabeth Maureen Maduro, Nee Painter, passed away that morning. And Ms. Glenda Maduro, who lived at Rockaway before she took ill, used to drive the Project Action bus, volunteer, and enjoyed it, interacting with the seniors, Mr. Speaker. And I associate the Honorable Member, Ms. Fogo, the Honorable Member, Mr. Simmons, the Honorable Member, Minister Renee Ming, and all other members that wish to be associated to those condolences. Ms. Maduro will be sorely missed, but made a very good contribution during her time here in life. Mr. Speaker, I would like a letter of congratulations sent to my cousin. Very proud of Dwayne Pearman, who continues his winning ways. We spent a lot of time together over the last, throughout our life, but more so over the last sort of 10 years, and particularly the last. Associate me, please, MPK. I'll associate the honorable member, his partner on the golf course, the Honorable Zane Silva, when he gets fit again. And he did outstanding, winning the Bermuda PGA Championship somewhere around 15 to 20 times. He's won it so many times. But he's a fierce competitor and a real gentleman, and a tourism ambassador, earns a taxi but practices golf and plays internationally still at his age. And I was very proud that he played in the first Bermuda Championship in 2019. He made me very proud, him representing the family and Bermuda and others as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Does any other Honorable Member wish to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
County, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to be associated with the congratulations sent by the Honorable Member from constituency number 2 and to professional golfer Dwayne Pearman on winning the BPGA this past weekend at Tuckers Point Golf Club. He had a tremendous 3 rounds of golf, finishing even par. But I'd also like to add congratulations to Chaka de Silva on his fine second place finish in that event, and to the third place finisher, Scott Roy. Bermuda professional golf can certainly play well, and congratulations to the entire field. I've had the opportunity, like some members of the House, to play with professional Dwayne a number of times. And if you play with him or don't play with him, you ask him how his round was, and he always shakes his head with a little smile and says, well, I sunk more putts, I had a better score. How true that might be for all of us golfers, Mr. Speaker. Congratulations for winning in style and continue to be a fine professional. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if on Monday condolences will pass to the family of Donald Hassel, who passed away over the last weekend.
Yes, they were done on Monday, so you can associate yourself.
I would associate myself with those condolences to the family of Donald. Mr. Speaker, I will always remember Donald with a person who had a smile on his face. He loved Bermuda. He loved everything he did. Work wasn't work. Work was part of living. And especially, Mr. Speaker, as you would know from your hail from the West End, he loved the West End of the island. He was all about Somerset. He contributed greatly to our community in many ways, outside of his family and friends, running a business, got involved in politics. Certainly, at 58 years old, Mr. Hassel is gone too soon, so I send condolences to his family and friends. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP. Would any other member like to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
MP Weeks? MP Weeks, you have your 3 minutes.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to you. I'd like to start off my remarks by asking to be associated with the remarks for the condolences for Neil Painter Jr. and the condolences for Ms. Jan and the condolences for Ms. Jan Martin.
Mr. Speaker, but on a happier note, I would like to congratulate our men's football team. I don't know how many people live streamed it last night, and even though the result wasn't favorable, we have to be mindful that our young players played with not the full score, but they played with a lot of heart and discipline, and we need to give encouragement regardless of the outcome of the game, because our youngsters have a lot of potential, Mr. Speaker. So let me be first to say hats off to them, and I'd like to associate whoever wants to be associated with that, Mr. Speaker. But hats off to our young team, and I'm looking for greater and better things in the coming months, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, please, Mr. Speaker.
Opposition leader, I see your camera came on. I heard you, but there were a couple other voices. But let me take you, and then I am trying to see who else is next. So there's the opposition leader.
And Mr. Speaker, also the clerk would like to ask, give us some statements.
Okay, opposition leader, you have your 3 minutes.
I won't be long. I'd just like to associate myself with the comments made in regards to Donald Hassel from Somerset. To me, he was a true success story in tourism. At 12 years old, Mr. Speaker, he joined Henry VIII as a dishwasher. At 15 years old, he went back and started as a junior chef. He then went on to work for North Rock Brewing, again as a chef. Eventually, he ended up at Country Squire as a chef. And in the end, he bought Country Squire and was their head chef there. To me, it epitomizes what can be done in this country. He was dedicated to tourism. He was dedicated to the culinary arts. And he was, in the end, a true entrepreneur and a true shining example for other people who are thinking of pursuing culinary arts and being a chef in this country. He was a bedrock of the Somerset community, and Somerset was truly where his heart was. In addition, he tried to enter politics in 2017. He was unsuccessful, but I applaud him for his efforts. He was truly a community man and a shining example of what we can do in Bermuda when we commit ourselves to getting it done. So condolences to he and his family. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to make a contribution? Premier, will you still?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Premier, I was acknowledging you, but it looked like your minister got my ear that time. Minister?
Surely. Mr. Speaker, first of all,
You have your 3 minutes.
thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to be associated with the comments for Neil Painter Sr. From St. George's, you would definitely have seen Mr. Painter driving around as he always was heading to RA because he was there in an executive capacity. And he will truly be missed in our community. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to extend congratulations to another St. George's boy, Chaka De Silva, on his second place finish in the Bermuda PGA Golf. We look forward to him one day be sitting up there in first place, and we'll continue to watch his career progress. I'd also like to extend congratulations to a new church that has opened its doors in St. George's, although the venue is common and known to us, but it's the Redeeming Grace Ministries being led by Bishop R. Dennis Simons. They meet Fridays at 7 p.m., but as you know, Mr. Speaker, we can never have enough prayer, so we welcome the church into the area. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I would like to be associated with the remarks which were given earlier on the condolences and requests for condolences be sent to the Painter family. I'd certainly like to be associated with those. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to be associated with condolences given from the honorable member for constituency number 13-3 regarding the family of PLP stalwarts, Miss Jan Martin. Ms. Martin was simply a warrior for Bermuda and certainly for her people. And she was someone who was in equal measure filled with love and the strength and willingness to fight for the causes that she believed in. And Mr. Speaker, as you would know, she certainly fought for the causes in which she believed in and made sure under no uncertain terms she gave her views and her opinions. Along with her tireless support of the Progressive Labor Party, Mr. Speaker, she was one of the co-founders and the heart and soul of Mobilize, Organize, Visualize, and Execute, or the group known as MOVE. And she was on the front lines of events during both in the Pathways to Status protests and also in regards to December 2016 and vocally protesting against the airport deal of the former government and one of the main drivers behind the formation of Bermuda Triangle Fishing Cooperative. She's one of those rare people whose actions were always in line with her words, no matter how bold they were, and her fighting spirit was never diminished. And there's no question, Mr. Speaker, that Bermudians have lost a true champion for their interests in this country. So I want to express my condolences to her entire family and wish to be associated with the condolences sent to her family from this House, Mr. Speaker. On a different note, I'd like to recognize Ms. Dorothy Pierman, who recently turned 100 years old and celebrated her birthday. And I wish to associate the entire House, Mr. Speaker, with a letter of congratulations from the House of Assembly that will go to the family to Mrs. Dorothy Pierman. I did have the pleasure of stopping by to see Ms. Pierman. I did follow all rules, of course, not allowed inside of the Sylvia Richardson Care Facility, but I made sure that we dropped by and delivered her flowers, as I do for all persons who turned 100. And I hope that she's enjoyed her birthday week, and I certainly want to wish her continued health and strength. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Does any other member wish to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, how are you?
Mr. Famous,
Yes.
how are you today?
I wish to associate myself, MP Swan beat me to it with the condolences for Miss Glenda Maduro, who was actually my aunt by marriage. She was married, her married name is because she was married to my uncle Audley Maduro from Tortola. She actually lived in Tortola for quite some years until then she moved back to Bermuda. Moving on, Mr. Speaker, moving into Smith's Parish, I'd like to give condolences to the Rossiter family on the loss of their father, Mr. Keith Rossiter, his wife Gillian, his son Stephen, Sarah, and Andrew. Moving into Devonshire, Mr.
I'd like to be associated with that, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, I'm quite sure you would.
Yes, you've been associated. Continue on, member.
Moving into Devonshire, Mr. Speaker, on condolences to my constituents from Susan Estate, Devonshire, Mr. Kevin Siggins. I'm sure MP Dunkley wants to be associated.
Associate me, Famous, please.
And MP Tyrrell, who was that was his constituent before it was mine. His wife Dolores, he leaves behind his wife Dolores and his daughter Debbie and various grandchildren. He was a very kind man. He lived until the age of 92, Mr. Speaker. And last but not least, I want to give condolences to the James family, specifically the James family, Dr. Clarence James family, on the loss of the brother of Dr. Clarence James.
Famous?
Okay. Yeah. The loss of their brother, Leonard John James, who actually was one of the Bermudians who migrated to New York post-World War II. He was a good friend of my Uncle Ronald. He was a dapper dresser. If you ever saw him out, this man was like no flies was on him. And and no matter when you saw him in Maryland or New York, he always say, Famous, I'm always, no matter where I am, I'm always going to be a porn dog, and I'm always going to be a petition. So therein lies the end of his story. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to make a contribution at this time? Any member? Before we move on, I'd just like to add my remarks to a couple made, and particularly to the Martin family on the loss of Jan. As been said already, she was one who always stood up for what she believed and let you know what she believed. She was forceful in that right, and not only will she be missed by her family, but the community, particularly Sands community, that strongly felt the presence of her family, and we just want to be associated with those condolences. I may have missed last week when the condolences were expressed to the Hassel family. I have known Donald for a long time in Somerset. I have close association with parts of his family, and I'd just like to be sharing that. And it did mention that he tried to enter the political realm. He was one of those who ran against me over the years. So I just want to express my condolences as well. And I'd like to add condolences to the family of Paul McCoy. Paul was one of those I knew from the insurance industry over the years. He has been the claims adjuster for my insurance business for many years with the association that I have with his company through Friesenbrook Meyer. And we are saddened by his loss, and just like to express condolences to his family, his wife, and his siblings. And he was one of those who truly believed in doing it his way, and his presence was always a strong presence when he was around, and his loss will be missed by many who have associated with him over the years, and we're saddened to see him go and at this time. But our thoughts will continue to be with he and his family and his friends. Thank you. With that said, we'll move on. And on the order paper, matters of privilege, there are none. Personal explanations, there are none. Notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, there are none. Introduction of bills. There are two bills to be introduced this morning, and let me say from the outset that these bills will require the indulgence of the House to be dealt with later on our order paper. Minister of Health, would you like to introduce your bills?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, I move that Standing Order 28-3 be suspended so that I may introduce the following bills so that they may be placed on the order paper for today's sitting, namely the Public Health Amendment Act 2021 and the Quarantine Amendment Act 2021.
Thank you. There are no other bills. However, we have a notice of a motion. Minister of Finance, would you like to put your motion?
Speaker, I give notice that I propose to move the following motion at the next day of meeting. That this Honorable House take note of Bermuda's Economic Recovery Plan Summary Report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Members, that brings us to the orders of the day. The first order this morning is the consideration of the supplementary estimate number 1 for 2019-2020. In the name of the Minister of Finance. Minister?
Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 43-4 and 43-5, I move that the supplementary estimate number 1 for the financial year 2019-20 be approved.
Members,